Alright, very warm welcome back everyone. Today we want to take a look at the limiter, and for this purpose I've loaded up one of my sketches I did some time ago and prepared this so that we can start with the limiting process. This drum loop comes prepared with a template from Steinbock, from Cubase in fact, and it is one of those templates you can find under the production part here. I think it might either be jazz or pop or dance, but I'm not sure about that anymore. And this is basically what I came up with, and this loudness is also your reference for the mastering purpose, for the mastering purpose afterwards. All right, and the only thing I did is basically add all of those tracks, effects channels included, to one of these group tracks we've talked about in the template video, namely the master track, so we can basically conduct everything that we want on this master track. So to do that, let me bring up the mixing console with hitting F3, and now we see our master track here, and we see all of these other tracks here. We also see that there are some inserts, but again, I've not prepared anything of this, but I just used the patches that are available already. And we want to load a limiter on this master bus. You see that we have quite a lot of those. The brick wall limiter and the standard limiter come prepared with Cubase. All the other ones are basically plugins that I've added. So we want to start with the standard limiter in this case. You see that we have 3 parameters that we can actuate, and in this case let's just put the auto release functionality on here and talk about the input and output knobs afterwards. So basically a limiter works as a compressor with a very high ratio. So we are talking about a compressor with a ratio of 10:1 and higher. So this basically means that they work similarly, right? In this case, we don't have an attack parameter because the limiter has to fire as fast as he can in this case, especially for this particular limiter. But we do have a release parameter, which basically, as for the compressor, tells us how long the limiter takes to reach its 0 point again. Then we have the input, which allows us to make our input signal louder or quieter if we decide to. And we have our output, which basically regulates how much quieter our output should be after the limiting process. And in this case, I'm going for -1 decibel. This is due to -1 decibel usually being the peak that is asked for streaming services. If you are going to master for CD, you probably find something like -0.3. And if you are mastering for streaming services and your material is very loud, you usually aim for -2 decibels, right? And now we want to take a listen back, and I'm just making this input a little bit higher. In this case, we start with 5 decibels, and let's see if we have any gain reduction going on. Also, pay attention to this true peak here, because we will get to the true peak value when you are talking about the brick wall limiter later on. So what we see is that our input stays the same, but our output is limited to -1 decibels, but with a true peak of -0.8. We still don't see any gain reduction, so let's hit the limiter a little bit higher or a little bit harder to see if anything goes on here. And now we see that the limiter actually has to do some work. You can even hear what happens if you have to, if the limiter has to regulate very aggressively. If we just put the input to its max, and you get basically this very squashed sound, and you basically hear that the limiter has to fire all the time. This is usually not something you aim for, but if you do, please feel free to do this. I wouldn't, because this doesn't sound very good. But if you want to please feel free to do so. One thing we see now is that our true peak is minus 0.5 decibels in comparison to the -1 we had before. And we also see that this gain reduction we had was quite massive, with close to 20 decibels of reduction. And this is usually something that happens when you are going to when you are limiting. This true peak can be circumvented if you put a brick wall limiter after this, or if you just use a true peak limiter, because this limiter is not a true peak limiter, as you can see. And this gain reduction is usually something you have to come up with some sort of setting that works best for you. These algorithms tend to work very good, but they work best when they do not have to regulate that harshly. So please be gentle with your limiters. They do the work, but they do the work best if they are not forced to be very, very aggressive, right? So if you just apply a little bit of limiting here and there, you should get better results than if you apply a limiter and go all in full throttle and think that the limiter can handle all of this.